Hello, today is Friday, August 21st. Welcome to episode 621 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed for the summer one time a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow John Lipsey. I'm joined today by NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson and Senior Director of the Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, who of course had a storied career in the U.S. Navy, in the U.S. Congress, and now at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He is also leads their missile and air defense program. So who better than Mark to help us with our topic today, which is the military campaign around the Iran war. We seem to be at a pretty significant inflection point. We're going to talk about the current status, the military capabilities that have proved to be critical to success or failure in this conflict, and the strategic and tactical options facing the United States today. I thought I'd sort of just orient us a little bit on where we've been and where we are now before we jump in with Mark. We of course entered an MOU with Iran several weeks ago, an MOU which is now expired according to its 60-day clock, but which we have not been following for quite some time. But if you remember, as we entered the MOU, there was basically huge ambiguity over what the agreement was around all the major issues in the conflict, including the status of Lebanon, the status of the Strait of Hormuz, and the status of the conditions around releasing frozen assets and other sanctions relief that Iran would be receiving. I think it's fair to say the first sort of battle over what the MOU was and wasn't was over the conflict in Lebanon, and Iran trying to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Israel over Israel's presence and operations in Lebanon. Rubio saved the day by reaching an agreement between the U.S., Israel, and Lebanon that essentially deemed Hezbollah to be an illegitimate presence in Lebanon, and deemed Israel to be a legitimate presence in southern Lebanon. The conflict then pivoted to the battle over the Strait of Hormuz, as the U.S. had opened up a southern route along the coast of Oman and was ferrying traffic toll-free and around Iranian accounting. What's the name of the group they set up? The Strait Regional Authority or something to that effect, that was meant to control and operate traffic through the Strait. The U.S. was bypassing that. Iran started firing at ships. And since then, we've been in the battle over Hormuz for several weeks. The first phase of that, I think, was featured Iran striking ships, the U.S. retaliating and striking at Iranian capabilities to monitor and engage in those strikes, and then Iran retaliating to those strikes by hitting Arab countries in the region, energy infrastructure, occasionally desalinization plant facilities and the like. The current phase we're in, I think it's fair to say, began at the beginning of August. The last U.S. strikes on Iran, I believe, were July 29th. We then, a couple of days later, were at the precipice, it seemed, of President Trump dramatically escalating the military campaign. But on August 2nd, he decided to call that off, reportedly at the request of Saudi Arabia and potentially other countries in the region. And since then, we've been watching Iran and Oman negotiate over a potential deal on the Strait to open that up to some degree or come to consensus that would allow the parties to re-enter the MOU. This week has featured President Trump calling off essentially those negotiations, and on Wednesday announcing an economic D-Day attack on Iran. We believe, or according to the president, what's coming is the most crushing economic operation ever taken against any country. Of course, the U.S. is already blockading Iran and the Strait and any traffic to or from Iran, which is having a dramatic economic impact in and of itself. But it seems there is more to come, potentially a willingness to take on China in particular, who is the most significant economic lifeline for Iran. I think that gets us up to today. Mark, feel free to add or edit any of that. But what I'd love to get us started with is just zooming out 40,000 feet. We've been through a lot over the last 5 months or so. Where are we? Where would you say we are on just sort of the long arc of the military campaign? What's the current state, and what are the most significant military factors that have presented themselves over the last several weeks and months, and that are most prominent on the minds of decision makers today?
All right, thanks. That was a good summary you had. I'll kind of handle it. Try to look at it from a very military perspective. I'll say first, and I mean at a strategic level, but from a military perspective, what I'd say is, look, the 40 days of attacks plus about 20 days of sporadic, of lower level attacks that happened in the 3 months after the initial ceasefire. Have done a lot of damage to Iran. And I know the mainstream media doesn't do a great job of focusing on this, but they've lost their Navy, their traditional Navy. They've lost their Air Force. They've lost their air defense systems. They've lost their ability to build missile and drone systems. That doesn't mean they can't rebuild it, but a lot of buildings have been crushed. They've lost a significant number of their missiles, not all of them. A significant number of their drones, not all of them. A lot of their anti-ship cruise missiles, not all of them, and a lot of their mine laying capability. Mines, I think not all of them capability, nearly all of their laying capability. So these are big things they invested in for 40 years and that they had and they threatened people with. A lot of that is gone. Their nuclear program, which had already had not been obliterated, as the president said last August, but had been rubbleized, got re-rubbleized with with more rubble. And I'm not sure what radioactive dust is, but I know that a lot of their, some of their HE, highly enriched uranium, was destroyed. And I suspect, more than, more centrifuges and more scientists were killed. So I think their nuclear program's been set back. Their military's been set back. Now, that does not mean you've won, but it means you've reduced all these. And these are not things that come back easy. People are like, well, they'll get manned portable air defense. They will. They'll get man pads someday from China or Russia. SA-300s and SA-400, SA-300 systems and indigenous Iranian systems based on the SA-300 are not man pads. They lost those systems. And so I think a lot of damage has been done. Now, we're in a stasis right now where the United States has, both the United States and Iran are attempting to control the Strait of Hormuz in a negative way, which is prevent the flow of the others, of fossil fuels supported by the other side. The United States blockade is working. Do I think 100% of ships are blocked? No. But do I think 95 to 98% are blocked? You bet. Does a tramp steamer working its way along the Pakistani coast, make it through on occasion? Maybe. They've tried to transition to using actual tanker trucks through Pakistan and other places. Turns out there's a reason you use ships and pipelines and air, to move this stuff and not tankers. That is not an efficient or effective way. Taking it through the Khyber Pass is not gonna get back their $15 billion a month in external fossil fuel sales. All right. The U.S. they limited for a while, but I think the reporting's now coming out that a tactic that I've been advocating for 3 months now at least. The idea that you could bring ships along through a transit lane carved through the Omani water, protected by the U.S. Air Force fighter jets overhead, U.S. Army and Air Force U.S. Air Force and Navy fighter jets overhead, U.S. Army and Air Force either A-10s or helicopters, armed helicopters to take out small boats, on the deck. You can shift through, and I think we're learning that they're getting anywhere from 10 to 15 ships through a night. Not all 2 million barrel, VLCC, 2 million barrel, very large crude container ships, but it turns out somewhere between 7 and 10 million barrels a day. There's been bigger days than 10 million, and there's been smaller days than 7, because not the 40 days of attacks, but the very specifically targeted 20 plus days of attacking, on different variants. The maritime radar and observation posts of the Iranian Navy on islands and ashore have taken away their ability to know when ships are moving, when they're targeting, how they are. And the last thing you want to do with a slow moving drone is fire it way off axis and hope that a U.S. Air Force plane doesn't run it down on its way to the target, right? Same with the cruise missiles. They have seeker heads that have to be reasonably open close to the object they're going to hit. They haven't done the further thing I'd have done, which is have U.S. Navy ships transit back and forth with them. I think it's worth the risk, personally. If the merchants are going to go, the U.S. Navy should go. That's what I did in 1988, 89, in the Wayback Machine, how the U.S. Navy did escorting, but we've chosen not to do that. In the meantime, we have now, one of the problems with that would be it would probably be radiating its radar, which would be kind of a beacon to the Iranians. Whereas I'm pretty sure all these ships are going in the dark, the merchant ships. But that's the trade space you'd be in there. I say all this to say the U.S. is starting to, between that and the flow of oil through east to west across the Saudi peninsula through pipelines and north to south through the United Arab Emirates, the plus up in those, we're starting to close in on the pre-war flow. We're at like 75%, anywhere from on a day from 60 to 80% of pre-war flow. That's not 100%, but that's starting to really get it back. And over time, that number could get higher, as more ships become comfortable. Will a ship still get hit? You bet. Will it get hit with a cruise missile that disables it? No. Could it get hit with a drone that, does some damage, kills somebody on board? Yes. But they can fight their way through that and get their way out. My point on this is, strategically, we're starting to see that the economic constriction that Secretary Bessent and the president have been talking about is going to start taking effect while we begin to relieve some of the pressure for the Western countries.
Mark, let me jump in and ruin John's planned sequence of questions. Yeah. How long can the U.S. Navy and other services maintain?
That was my question.
Oh,
yeah. How long can they maintain this?
How long can we do this?
It's a fair question. But look, there's two answers to this. How long can they? How long should they? Because they can do this for another, 12 to 18 months. There will be every 3-month chunk of that is a bigger hit on the long-term readiness of the force. And so let me explain that. Yeah. Let's just say, there's about 18 destroyers involved in all this. We have destroyers defending Israel, right, from ballistic missile attack. We have destroyers in the Bab el-Mandeb. We have destroyers with each of the 2 carrier strike groups. We have destroyers doing blockade duty. We might have destroyers getting ready to do convoy or sitting in the general region to render assistance to someone coming out. 18 destroyers, 2 aircraft carriers and their attached air wings. It's hard to say exactly how many, but in Israel, Jordan, and Western Saudi Arabia, 6 to 8, Air Force fighter squadrons. A big chunk of our Patriot and our deployable Patriot and THAAD forces. So I just described 4 assets: surface combatants, carriers, Air Force fighter squadrons, and Army air defenders. All 4 of those are forces that will soon be in extremis for their ability to generate capacity 2 and 3 years from now. And what I mean by that is you can keep flowing stuff in. There's stuff getting trained up, right? Going through maintenance or training right now. The stuff going through training right now will be ready to come out in 6 months. The stuff going through maintenance right now will go through training and be ready to go in 12 months. The problem's going to be when this stuff coming back, starting about 4 months ago from extended deployments they weren't planning on, are going to be going into maintenance and training all at the same time. And then, so about 18 months from now, there is not going to be a carrier coming out there, or certainly not 2 carriers coming out. There's not going to be 18 destroyers. There's not going to be the 6 fighter squadrons. And when you look back and say, oh, there's a crisis in China or Russia, we're going to go, well, we've got Army fighter squadron readiness has dropped down to 35%. How'd I pick that number out of my ass? Let me tell you. We did this in 2012, 2013, 2014. We did a maximum pressure campaign against Iran with this, about this number of fighter squadrons, with 2 carrier strike groups, with excess destroyers, with Army air defenders. And what happened was, at the beginning of 2017, for the first time in 70 years, we had no aircraft carrier deployable. At the same time, Air Force fighter squadron readiness had dropped down into the mid-30s. Army air defender retention was bottomed out. So these same units now, these are all 4 things you need for a China fight and a Russia fight. And now they're going to be in extremis. And another thing I'll say, one last thing I'll say on this is, the good news in the Pacific is we're not tying up submarines in the Middle East, because that would kind of suck, right? Because that's one of our, that's a critical element. But, the U.S. war plan for China isn't, all summer, give me more submarine, give me more cowbell. It isn't just submarines. It's, you need fighter squadrons, you need carriers, you need destroyers, and you need Army air defenders. So we are going to be in extremis in China, not today, not 2027, but 2028 or 2029. Same thing for a Russian, Suvlaki Gap initiative, invasion, something like that. We're going to be in extremis in 2028, 2029, 2030. So from my point of view, which, by the way, is about when I think China will be ready to do something, and about when Russia might be able to recover from Ukraine and do something. So the fact that they can't do something now doesn't really matter, because they weren't gonna. But the fact that we won't be able to respond 2 or 3 years from now really matters. So this readiness issue is really big. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I don't think President Trump has trouble sleeping at night hearing he's creating a readiness condition for his relief. He wants to win the war we're in today, right? And so he thinks, he's been told by Besant that continuing this system where we're constricting Iran, trying to increase our own flow through, is a winner. And, he may be right. Secretary Besant's a smart guy. Maybe his analysts at the Department of Treasury say the Iranian economy is on pins and needles and ready to crack. And if we just keep this up for another 3 or 4 months, they'll crack. But I don't know that for a fact, because I'm not an Iranian economist.
So what's the date? Is there a date in the near or medium term that is the pivot for the problem you're describing? Is it November?
I would say so. You mean the readiness crisis, or
election day?
Is it election day?
No. The readiness crisis kicks in, is probably around 9 months of this, so pretty soon.
Okay.
Starting pretty soon, there's an impact.
So that's March. That's March of 2027.
No. Right.
He's counting time served.
9 months from February.
Okay.
So what I'm telling you is around this, September, October is when, if you're keeping this up, you're going to have a readiness impact. Now, that readiness impact gets worse every 3 months you add to this. I would look at it as a quarterly thing. And about every 3 months, you kind of avert your eyes as future Air Force readiness goes down, future Navy readiness goes down, future Army missile defender readiness goes down. They're all going to go down, pretty much linearly every 3 months that you keep this up. And the final one, if you do this for 18 months, say next summer, late summer is when you end this. Let's just say that you will have done serious readiness damage. And it's not, none of this stuff's recoverable, because the only way you recover it is you go back in time with your time machine and build more of something, or build a better maintenance depot system, or build a better supply chain system, or build a better training environment. And we didn't do those things.
Or
So,
presumably you could add to your, sorry, John, I'm totally jumping in here. You could add to the forces that are deployed by bringing in allies and that kind of thing.
yeah.
If there's that kind of capability,
You could not start the war. I mean, I can give you a lot of ifs, right? So, but let's get back to, you asked whether, so that's answering one of the questions. When do I think it goes? Now, when do I think the constriction kicks in? Again, not an economist of the Iranian economy, but I think the president's understanding is after the election. I think the way he's talking now, he's doing this. I'm hypercritical of the president because I think just how he treats our allies and partners as issue one is unacceptable, but there's many others. But I will give him credit that he has rope-a-doped the hell out of the oil markets and everyone. I mean, they can't tell up from down when he's talking. I mean, they generally don't believe him, but they don't know which part to not believe. So, he's maintained this, and I'll bet here's my other secret sauce for you. I think somewhere between September 20th and October 5th, somewhere in that 15-day period, the U.S. dumps 5 million barrels a day from our strategic petroleum reserve, minimum maybe 10 million a day. We squeeze the Japanese and Koreans who've been back in, who've been hoarding oil to do the same thing, because in the end they do what we say, and it drives down gas prices gradually from October 1st to November 1st. And he says, well, there you go, I solved it. So I hate to,
it's been done before.
It's been done. Yeah, that is not the great. We used to say the worst ever sale of gas or dumping of gas with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was done by President Biden just like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, in advance of his election. Except now Trump said, no, I'll take you one more and take her down even further.
But they're such different presidents, aren't they?
Well, that's politicians. They're not different. You know what I mean? They're both politicians, right?
So let's stick on the sort of readiness broadly taken topic. Let's talk munitions. That's been a big focus of attention of the media. It seems potentially of the president. It's like this is an issue that national security folks have been talking about for a long time, and it turns out that we don't have what we would like to have on this front, and everybody who said that for a decade was right. And but we are where we are. Can you help people sort of just break down the different components of this? What do we have plenty of? What are we? Yeah. What have we run through? As an example, and you can correct any of these stats, but just broadly, if you take Patriots, which is one of our key sort of interceptors playing defense, it's the reporting I've seen is that we've used around 1,500 Patriots through the wars thus far, leaving us with 1,700 in the stock. And just to give people a sense, I believe we produced 600 in 2025, and we've been pulling them from Europe, from Korea, from Asia, pulling them to the Middle East, like you were talking about the other assets. Zelensky is desperate for these right now as we head into the winter. He's asking for help on that every day. It seems to be his main point that he's making with the U.S. right now. But we, and my understanding is that it's going to take 2 or more or 3 or more years to just replace what we've spent, let alone meet all the needs that we very clearly have around the world. That's a prominent example of the challenge, but not the only one. But overall, it just seems, I mean, it's really hard to stomach that this is just something we can't do, that we can't as a country accelerate, bring to scale absolutely essential national security necessary capabilities. It's like you're in World War II, you're like, oh well, we can build 1 ship a year and that's the answer, and we'll just live with that. Help explain to me why we can't do better.
All right, that's a lot in there. So I'll start with the munitions part, and then I'll try to answer the rest. And anything I forget, you get at me. So let's start with munitions. I try to look at munitions in 5 buckets. The first one is long-range precision strike munitions, so Tomahawks and JASSM ERs. We started the war with Iran with enough for our China, right on the fringes of enough for our China-Russia war plans, probably. I think we wanted more, but we weren't pushing hard on Tomahawk. We only built 100 Tomahawk the year before, so we weren't, we clearly didn't think we were in jeopardy. We're keeping JASSM ER about the same. So I think we thought we were okay. We expended way more than you would have expected in the first 10 days of the 40-day war, and we used like 40% of each of them. And so now that's an extreme.
Sorry, before we move, why? Right? Like,
long-range precision guided munitions to take out air defense systems, the supporting structures for air defense systems, command and control networks.
But haven't we in Israel done that like 6 times over the last year? Why did we have to expend so much?
Some of it because
to achieve air dominance.
When Israel did it for the 12-day war, if they were striking like an SA-300 system, they'd hit the radar at one site. At the next site, they might hit the C2 system. At the next site, they might hit the radar again. The next site, they might hit the launchers. So when the 12-day war was over, the Iranians are scrambling to put systems back together. The Iranians are world-class scramblers, right? And backyard mechanics. They kept F-14s flying for like 55 years after we cut off, after we cut off, 55 years after we cut off, support to them. That's why that's what you use those on. I think we probably overused them. I think that if someone does an analysis of that, it'll probably be.
So this is my question on this is, are we in, I mean, maybe rightfully so from the president's standpoint, but were we 100% risk averse on the potential for
I think so.
a American aircraft to be taken down and a pilot to getting into a hostage situation? I mean, we had a close call and the world stopped for a couple of days.
Yes. I mean, that's part of it. And so now both JASSM ER was already starting to accelerate production. It's going to, and it'll come back. And it was being produced, I want to say, in the 580 to 650, something like per year. So I think it's coming back pretty quick. Tomahawk, they've really had to increase, and they just signed a $23 billion deal with Raytheon to get to, I think, 1,000 a year pretty quickly, and then keep it at that rate for, a number of years, probably 5-7 years. Plus, the other problem there is our allies buy Tomahawk, like Japan and the UK and others, and suddenly it's hard to, we're having to delay deliveries to them as well. So you're going to see a big change. You're seeing that change. That's system 1. System 2 is short-range precision-guided munitions, JDAM ERs, JSOW, 500, 1,000, 2,000-pound precision-guided munitions. We use them a lot in the next 30 days of war and more recently, in the sporadic operations we were doing. And we got 100,000 plus of those. I mean, we can target the world several times over. I think we're okay there. I think we're okay before the war.
This is what generally like Hegseth or Trump or whomever, that's what they're
we got all the munitions we
referencing.
need. Yeah. I mean, so they don't deal with all 5 of what I'm about to tell you. Now, number 3 is our air defense munitions. We didn't have enough for the China and Russia problems before the war started. And now we definitely don't have enough because we used more than 50% of each of them. The THAADs and Patriots. And I think Patriot from 2,100 down to 800 allegedly. We'll find out over time. Now, to the credit of Congress and the administration, before the war started, they had seen this problem because there wasn't enough before the war started, and started the multi-year procurement frameworks and then contracting. And I think the contracts I just saw might have totaled like $80 billion for THAAD and Patriot,
That's right.
to quadruple THAAD and triple Patriot production over the next few years, and then maintain it there. So 2,000 per year for Patriot kind of levels. So that will get us healthy in 3 to 4 years. It was unhealthy before the war. It's now a very sick man. So that's number 3. And by the way, I'd also include in that Navy Standard Missile 2s, 3s, and 6s. 2s are for air defense. 3s are for ballistic missile defense. and 6s can do all kinds of stuff. And they all got low. They got low during the Bab el-Mandeb stuff with the Houthis, and we're already being bought a little bit extra. Now we're buying them a lot extra. And some of those, I think the SM3s and 6s got moved into multi-year production opportunities, which will allow you to do bigger contracts. But I expect to see those pretty soon. Same with something called AMRAAM, which is an air-to-air weapon and can be used in an air defense role. All right, that was number 3. Number 4 is drone defense. Now, there's 3 ways to defend against drones. Air-based, which is F-15s, F-16s, F-18s with advanced precision kill weapon system, a 2.75-inch rocket that's been kick butt in Ukraine and it's been kick butt in the Middle East. The problem is you got to get it's for defending sites with some strategic depth. You can't be like feet dry over Iran at 3,000 feet so you can get behind the drone and shoot it down. That you will get shot down if you do that. You know, your American plane. So you have to wait till it's over the Arabian Gulf and it's already, or Persian Gulf, and it's already headed to. So Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Eastern Saudi Arabia, like Prince Sultan Air Base, and UAE are all like great. You can't really use an air-based defense alone, an aircraft-based defense alone to defend against it. But why do no Shaheds get to Israel? Because we and the Israelis shoot 500 of them down in a night as they flow there. Because we get in behind them and just because we got like 4 hours to do it because they go like 130 miles an hour, right? So same with Jordan and same with Western Saudi Arabia. Okay. The other way you do it's jamming. We don't have anything. What I see in Ukraine when I'm there, like it makes my teeth hurt. There's so much damn jamming, around the front line. I mean, I'm joking, but it definitely my phone hurts. There's a lot of jamming going on there, and we don't have near enough of that. That's why our butts should not be on Karg Island for any more than a couple hours, because we will be taking one-way attack drones in the teeth because we don't have the jamming. The third way is ground-based interceptors. In Ukraine, what I've seen is 23 different, there's probably more, but I've seen 23 different types of ground-based interceptors go up and shoot down Shaheds. I saw none of those in the U.S. defending the U.S. bases or our partners' critical infrastructure at the beginning of this war. And if you were going to ask me what led to mission failure in the 40-day conflict, I would say it's our inability to defend the bases against our military bases and our partners' critical infrastructure, water, desalinization plants, electrical power grids, that kind of stuff from these Iranian drone attacks. And the insanely crazy thing about that is that people knew this. Like 2 years ago, people like me were coming back to the Department of Defense saying there is a change out there in both the Biden and Trump administrations, and we did not pivot fast enough on, ground-based drone interceptors. And famously, Zelensky came to Trump last summer and said, "Man, I got the answer for you on this ground base. You need these. I can help you." And Trump gave one of his, "you've got no cards" speeches and said, "I don't need your help." The president was wrong. The army.
Not only that, didn't the administration try to pressure Saudi and others to not do deals with Ukraine around this stuff?
I can't talk to that for sure. I've certainly heard rumors, but I really can't talk to it for sure. I know that they're working with them now. And I'll give you one more. I can't believe this is true. The one general that I thought really had this, a guy named Chris Donahue, our U.S. Army Europe commander, who set up a special battalion to study and work on this in Europe. So they fired Donahue about 3 weeks ago. He's retiring next week. Our most skilled and capable Army general, and the Hegseth's crony, who's the acting chief of staff of the Army, General Laniv, just shut down the battalion doing this work. I'm sorry. At some point, you got to call it like you see it. And this is not sane. And the Army failed. I want to be clear here. The Navy screws up all the time. The Air Force screws up all the time. But they didn't screw this up. The U.S. Army failed to defend the military bases against drones, and then they failed to defend our partners' critical infrastructure. And we experienced mission failure after the 40-day war due to that. And Pete Hegseth won't acknowledge that.
So
You know,
let's break down where we are from a force posture perspective in the region, because like what you're getting at. So I want to get to the, like, can we defend critical infrastructure or not? What's the implication of that for like escalating the military campaign or whatever? But just what has been the impact so far on our inability to defend our own bases? I think, I think we were out of Bahrain, our main logistics hub. We were out of Bahrain on day one or something like that of the war.
So
We just got.
we've left Manama in Bahrain, our maritime ops center. We've left bases in Kuwait, largely. We've largely left Al Udeid in Qatar, our air ops center, and we've moved these things deeper. I think, we've done the right thing. Brad Cooper deserves a lot of credit for quickly realizing, holy crap, I need strategic depth. And those centers are in, those things are, the forces are in Jordan and Israel and Western Saudi Arabia. And some of the op centers are in Florida and Georgia and Germany.
Diego Garcia,
and
2,200 miles away.
Yeah.
British territory. They wouldn't let us use it.
Op centers are fine. Op centers can be, the maritime op center can be, you can put it in Bahrain. If you have the right connectivity, you can put it on the backside of the moon. I don't really care. It's an op center. It's not the people.
I'm talking about logistics that are needed to serve the Navy while they sustain the.
Well, we were never going to be that. The Navy has a challenge here where I think this is where we made a mistake. This did not stop the war from going, though. I'm back on the Army. Stopped the mission failure. The Navy's failure was like constantly nodding their head, like, yeah, we'll use Al-Udeid, we'll use Jebel Ali, which is a port in near Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, inside the Strait of Hormuz. It's a logistics site. It's a great logistics site for fighting Saddam Hussein. It is not a great logistics site for fighting Iran. And we knew this because if you go back in the Wayback Machine to 1998 and then later in the 1990s, Iran attacked and mined the places going in there. So they understood the value of Bahrain and Jebel Ali. We knew that 40 years ago, they showed us that they understood this. And 40 years later, we're still relying on those places. So that's an F for the Navy in part of their report card. They got some B's and C's and other ones, so they pass. The Army got like a hard F to drag down the whole grade sheet. And so I'm just, so yes, that's a problem. Look, if you understand why the Lincoln is stressed because there's no port visits, because logistics is slow. Here's another Navy ding. The Navy, for the number of ships we have, we should have 30 more logistics ships. For the number of warships we have, we should have 30 more logistics ships. We don't. There's mathematics that go back to World War II. And you can't like AI food smaller, right? You know what I mean? We don't have the Star Trek thing that like, hey, give me a hot cup of coffee and pop it's up in the, it's in the microwave, or whatever it was on Star Trek. We don't have that stuff yet. So we needed logistic ships. We didn't have them. We needed bases. We don't have them. If you look at a chart or map for the Army guys of the Middle East, the area outside the strait, it goes like this, like water. There's not a lot of, and countries we don't like, and or where it's not safe. So there's not a lot of port. We haven't developed the ports there. You're right, Diego, Singapore. I think I'll just stop right there. Is ports that And
is there anything farther?
That's 2,000.
San Diego.
Yeah, 2,000 and 2,500 miles away. Enjoy, boys. So they get these long deployments.
Mark, what was your fifth bucket? I feel like we only made it through four.
That's right. Yeah, the fifth bucket was the anti-ship stuff. So that's Mark 48 torpedoes and LRASM, long-range anti-ship cruise missiles, and harpoons. We didn't use those. We did use a Mark 48 to some effect. Maybe we used two on that. I'm not sure. On the Iranian frigate we sank near Sri Lanka. But we did not stress the Mark 48 slant long-range anti-ship cruise missile inventories, both of which are the torpedo one is probably at a minimum needed for China and Russia. The LRASM one is still low and needs to be getting built, but that's just it's a new weapon system being built up. So I feel better about that. And that's a big win for for PACOM that we didn't take those ones down, because that would have hurt a little bit.
So of your 5 buckets, 3 of them are in serious trouble.
Yes. I mean,
What?
2 of the 3 were in serious trouble before the war started. The ground-based drone system didn't exist. I got to say, in some ways, I'm glad we're finding this out with Iran and not with Russia in a Souvlaki Gap, Baltic, Poland war, where there'd be a whole lot of dead Americans involved in our learning process. The number of Americans associated with this learning process who've been killed is probably under 10, or right around 10 or 11, which is horrific for those families. But compared to what it would be in a place where we have 80,000 troops on the ground spread throughout Europe, we could really be hurting.
So, Mark, you've said, I think you've said, those shortages, those inability, those lack of capabilities, led to. Did you say is it mission failure? Is that what you
Yeah,
described?
we had to
Is that how you
stop.
put it? Yeah.
We had to stop.
So let's talk about that and where we are in the war. And as you described, we heard a lot from the president and Secretary Bessent this week, and I guess we're going to hear more next week about them trying to go to every length to strangle the economy of Iran and the IRGC. Whether that's a kind of a tactical pause measure meant to be a contribution during a pause here as we wait for the election or not, who knows. But obviously the other option, the option that the president seemed on the precipice of pursuing at the start of the month, would be an escalation militarily. There hasn't been a strike by the U.S. in 20 days or more now. We're not responding tit for tat with every strike from Iran that hits a tanker or a commercial ship vessel, as we're trying to get them through the strait. So we've sort of unilaterally paused the military campaign here. What are before we get to can we do the things that we would have to do on the defense side to sustain or support a new campaign? But if we were going to escalate militarily, or what the administration was considering, to the best that what would we be doing at this stage militarily? What are the what are the options? What are we hitting at this point that we haven't hit yet? What's the sort of strategic objective? What are you trying to get as an outcome of renewing the military campaign, or escalation to some degree? Are we talking at this stage you're trying to bring down the regime? Are you trying to bring the economy down through military means? Are you trying to take out certain additional capabilities? What do you think what's the option set?
Okay, so first, I agree that what they're doing right now strategically is a non-military approach to strangling them. There's a big military part to it. The Air Force doing their thing,
the blockade and
the blockade with the Navy. That's all.
And the escort,
and the escort. All that stuff is important. And the fact that they had mission failure at the end of day 40 doesn't mean that they're going to fail, but it does mean they had to stop. And so, to go back into combat ops, I do want to say, even though you said not discuss it, I will say we better. I don't think we've went and got enough ground-based defense systems yet. There's rumors of some MIROPS, which is something we use in Ukraine, built by Eric Schmidt's company. That's really good. Has a surveyor as the weapon. It's done a couple intercepts allegedly of drones. We got to have a lot of those.
To your point on us not getting. Bringing Ukraine into the mix before the war. It seems some of our allies have, but as far as out of the U.S., the only thing I've seen announced is an agreement to import some Ukrainian drones to the United States to test them.
I think MIROPS are in theater because a MIROPS operator was killed.
But are those U.S.?
Those are U.S. built. They're U.S. given to Ukraine. Designed by Eric Schmidt's company. I don't know exactly where they're constructed. It might be in the U.S., but I'm pretty sure a MIROPS operator was killed in Jordan in one of the ballistic missile strikes. So they're there, and I'm pretty sure a MIROPS has shot down a drone, and probably more than that's happened now. There's probably been more than one. But I don't know that we're thick with that yet. If we need to be, I'm hoping we are. And I hope that we're pushing and pushing and pushing. Once we have a stable, between us and our Arab partners, have a good ground-based drone defense. I think, and the president says, go forth and strike. That's the question you're asking. What would I strike? Here's what I'd strike. First of all, I'd resurface all the maritime radars and warning picket points and that we did, after the ceasefire in those, 15, 20 days of intermittent striking, just to get them again. Always good to double tap that stuff. Then I would personally I would hit any new targets we understand are associated with the defense industrial base around ballistic missiles and drones. I'm sure we didn't get everything, or we got a building and we learned later from communications that they had another building. Go get them. Anything with the nuclear program that we didn't hit, I'd hit. But here's the most important add. I would go after the IRGC's companies. So the IRGC, when 1979 happened, the clerics took over all these companies. And, let's be clear, leaders get rich in authoritarian states, and they were getting rich. And the IRGC at some point wanted some scratch, for all the work they were doing, like killing 1 million, Iranians in fighting Iraq. They're like, hey, we need a little bit of scratch. They got companies. They're like state-owned enterprises in a way, and they are construction, shipbuilding, communications. There's a few others, but those are the big sectors. I would declare every one of them a legitimate military target because it funds the IRGC, who is our opponent here. Our opponent is not the people of Iran. It is the IRGC. I would declare those legitimate, and I would hammer the crap out of them. Then I'd turn to Mohammed bin Zayed, our good friend in the United Arab Emirates, and say, look, I know you're trying to be like the Switzerland of the Middle East, but those IRGC boys got their money tied up in your banks. Freeze it. Drain it. Let them know pain is coming. Look, the UAE is no friend of Iran. Of all the Arab states, they're number one on the FU Iran list, and vice versa from Iran. So I think they'll do it. Best in squeezing with the sanctions. And this is where the Europeans got to cut. Last thing I'll say in this is we do need some European play. Look, they're never going to send a ship to do anything or an aircraft, but we got to get on them. They're treating us as two equal co-belligerents, the U.S. and Iran. Oh, there's this war. I don't know. You didn't warn us about it. You can't. Some countries said you can't use our accesses. Most have come back off of that. But let's be clear. One of them is the country that's that's had your back for 35 years while you guys dilly-dallied around on defense spending. That would be the United States. And the other one is a country that's been a 47-year authoritarian regime, supporting terrorist organizations the whole time, supports Houthis, Hezbollah, proxy groups in Iraq and Syria, has killed 1,000 Americans in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, killed 500 NATO troops, non-American, in Iraq and Afghanistan, killed 1,000 plus people in Europe through terrorist actions over 40 years, and killed 30,000 plus of its own people in 36 hours, which is why Trump kind of tripped his brain on this back in December. These are not two co-equal belligerents. Stop the bullshit on this and come down hard with us on sanctions on them. I know you can't do the military stuff because you're weak and pathetic, but you can do this. They are. I'm going to tell you right now, when you only spend 2% on defense for 20 years or less than 2%, the service that gets hurt the most is the expensive service, the Navy. So they don't have, throughout all of, if you got all of Europe together, they could not get the 18 destroyers. They couldn't get 5 destroyers on station in the Middle East. If you put all of Europe together, you could probably get some minesweeping in 3 months. You could get one carrier strike group for 3 months and then you're done. I mean, let's be clear. There is no there. So don't even ask for it. Ask for sanctions, true sanctions that hold Indian and Chinese and other teapot refineries accountable for taking Iranian fuel. That's how that's the last little best squeeze that probably helps crack the Iranian economy.
Hannah, we have to call this episode "Stop the Bullshit."
Yeah. All right.
So I couldn't agree more. The Europeans have frankly been disgraceful from the start, from my perspective. Do they have? They don't have ships to send. Do they have relevant munitions to send to help on that front? Okay, so
Okay,
just
let me
take it
be clear.
all.
They could send a ship or two. I don't want to downplay the Royal Navy, the mighty Royal Navy, the king of the waves.
I know they worked for a couple weeks to try to get a ship into region.
Yeah,
Did it ever get here?
They did. I think they're defending Cyprus now. But look, they have. I mean, I know their Minister of Defense didn't know how many ships they had, but they've got between, depending how you count them, between 13 and 17 surface combatants, and they can get one or maybe two into the fight. I'll give them credit for two. The French could get a couple into the fight. The Spanish could get a couple in the fight, but we're pretty sure they're not coming. The Norwegians might be able to get one. The Germans
might come in on the other side.
The Germans' best ships, by the way, have no actual weapon systems on them yet. I don't want to get into all that, how crazy that build was. And you're asking about munitions. No, in fairness to them, they didn't have much munitions to begin with, and they gave a lot of it to Ukraine. And they've been given till it hurts, especially since Trump very inappropriately, completely, disconnected, dropped our security assistance 99% in 1 year. They stepped in and covered. And I'll give them credit for that. Big credit. But in this case, it's time to back us on Iran.
So it seems the critical question here is, can we defend regional energy infrastructure, water infrastructure? The way you described it, and I agree with, is we proved earlier in the war that we couldn't.
Yeah.
And that seemed to lead to Saudi and others saying, continuously pressuring the president every time he would start to come to a precipice of escalating, them talking into the next de-escalation phase and negotiation phase. And Saudi's off looking to create new defense alliances and things like that. But is there any reason to believe that over the course of the last month, 2 months, we've developed the capability to defend, admittedly, a hard to defend, massive geographic region of targets that are all critical to the global economy, to the lives of millions of people in the region? That has been the restraining factor on American action and sort of total victory, if you will. You said multiple times that issue has led to mission failure, or at least for periods of time. Can we get that locked down so that we can prosecute the war the way it needs to be? This is all on the assumption that the IRGC, there's no scenario where the IRGC agrees to the capitulation that the president has been demanding on the nuclear program and on opening the strait.
So here's how I see it. So first of all, we're going to need this if we want to go back to combat operations, but we're also going to need it near the end game of Besson's, choking them to death, right? Boa constrictor,
because they will react.
At some point, they're like, "God damn, this is." I mean, that's when we're going to know the pain's really there. When they just start no military movement at all, and they're not striking at ships; they're firing at Saudi desalination plants. So look, it's a couple things going on. One, we have a lot less military stuff to defend. We've moved all of that stuff back. Like I said, Jordan, Israel, Western Saudi Arabia, with strategic depth. Adds a little fuel in the flight. I'm sorry for the green energy guys.
I mean, Jordan got hit pretty hard recently.
Yeah, but that was a ballistic missile, right? And we've been shooting them down. I'm going to give the Army credit. They did not fail in ballistic missile defense. Ballistic missiles hit. Lots hit. But they shot down 93 to 97%. They'll tell you some numbers like that. Now, we don't have enough capacity, so we didn't engage as many as we could have or should have. We had undefended bases, in some areas. So I want to be careful there. They were that part went well. By the way, stuff bought by the Missile Defense Agency, not the Army. Something to think about in terms of Army acquisition. So back on the other issue, are we okay? I don't know yet. I hope we're flowing in these drones, because you can't move the desalination plant, the power grid, the gas fields. They're kind of pinned, right? And by the way, the final sign of desperation from the Iranians will be striking the gas fields of Saudi Arabia and UAE, because when that happens, we will strike Karg Island and all their gas fields, and then they will be short, the 300 billion a year in fossil fuel sales for a decade, not just the month to month the convoy's doing. So we have got to get the drone defenses in. I don't know that they're there yet, but I wouldn't know because I'm not on the ground there. And they're not having enough drones fired at them right now to get kind of a readout on that. The planes can help a little. Jamming could get better. But in the end, you're going to need ground-based interceptors. I think the Saudis are buying them. I think the UAE is buying them. I think Qatar is buying them. I'm not sure about Bahrain and Kuwait. And I think I just don't know if we have them in the density required. And remember, we're using them to defend our bases right now. The question is, are we also putting them around their critical infrastructure?
So it seems like one way or another, we're going to have another probably very significant military clash, whether it's of sort of our choosing from not achieving our objectives from the economic squeeze, or the economic squeeze is effective and Iran goes on offense. And having another couple months to flow in this kind of capability to defend a broad range of assets might be useful, and might be on the minds of the president or other decision makers on why we're going the course we are right now.
Yeah, it would be helpful. I agree. It would be helpful if we kind of would acknowledge out loud we had this mission failure. That's not a strategic failure. It's not a campaign failure. It's that on this mission we are on, to use kinetic power to impose a change in regime behavior, we failed. And we failed and ceased operations at day 40, I think principally because we could not defend against the drones. I mean, people get confused that's about the time when the plane got shot down, and we spent $350 million like recovering one airman, which is a fantastic. It says a lot about our military that we will do that, intentionally sacrifice aircraft to recover him. That's the bond we have. That is not why we stopped the strategic air campaign. We stopped it because we could not take the beating on our own facilities and on our partners' critical infrastructure. And even if we could move back to the strategic depth, we still couldn't protect our partners.
Thank you, Mark. That was excellent. Les, any last words from you?
No, thanks, Mark. Really terrific.
Thanks, guys.
That's a wrap, folks. Thanks to Hannah Haynes, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, August 28th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.